Every time he'd look out the window, one man would forget he was on the train. He eventually came to realize that his looking out the window was actually a staring inside, which finally forced him to reconsider just what constitutes an in here and an out there, and why his unattended attention could be so costly and disruptive. There are certain things that ordinary travelers are better off not knowing, but nothing of such a nature exists for the mystic knight. Indeed, such are the hobbles that would bind him to that distorting two-way mirror on the world. Rule: mystics always travel in threes, even when by themselves. Mainstream humanity's drug of choice is thoughts. Automatic, ever-running, uncontrollable thoughts. The simple live in slums and continually talk of remodeling. They never do, but even if they did, it wouldn't change anything. Everyone, even the rich, educated, and cultured, are born simple and live in slums. The religious, given the choice of either meeting God or fulfilling rituals, and psychiatric patients the choice of either getting cured and ceasing treatment or continuing to return and work on the problems, will both choose the latter. Mythological update. Men got the idea for imaginary creatures from human institutions. But wait! This implies imagination being able to imagine itself. Well, why are you so upset? Have you never watched your own thoughts at work? As a little heartless, we should probably consider that means harmless, fun. One man's consciousness would sometimes sing to him, "Oh, I fumble and I bumble. I wander around in a daze. But it's okay, not to worry. I was made to work that way." Sometimes a man found this less entertaining than others. There was once two fighters who would periodically duke it out for brief periods of time. One was much more experienced, stronger, and with greater endurance, but the man to whom the challenger belonged wouldn't give up. Only those of uncontrolled, unattended thinking believe in mortal heroes. The few who see life firsthand understand that the good and bad come and go, only the names change, only life remains constant in its heroics. The featured speaker declared, "Just before you're about to die, you get real serious." And a young man in the audience retorted, "Well, I'm just 22 years old and in perfect health, and I'm serious." And the speaker replied, "I didn't say anything about one's physical aspect." The upsetting news is that if you discover that you're not sick, then no remedies are needed. To a man prepared to take it, this is not, however, disturbing news. Quite the old contrary. One man's private favorite song was, "I'll swim my swim alone, 'cause that's the way it is." I started to add an appropriate tune to that, but I noticed my melodic parodies dating from the 30s and 40s fall on unappreciative ears. Hint, Moon Mulligan. Life made everyone basically conscious. Beyond that, it's up to you. Under certain conditions, the simple find it profitable and love to speak of themselves collectively and in the third person. Attended consciousness is to automatic thinking as an ornithologist is to an etymologist, as a bird is to an insect. When seated, one man would first place his weight on his right haunch, then on his left, then he'd stand and walk around, then return to his seat and place his weight on his right haunch. It's difficult to keep people standing, for it ultimately requires some attention. Or will it make you feel better? And if somebody in the back said, well, now I feel more at home. Now all I need is a 4-door Buick. The reason that ordinary people wouldn't be interested in the great struggle if they understood what it is because it is far too simple and far too difficult. The expansion of conscious awareness is the only neural activity about which mere thinking won't help. If you can explain what you do, then what you do ain't worth talking about. One day, one man told all of his possessions how much he appreciated all the help that had been to him. And they all replied that it had been their pleasure, except for those that gave him a rousing Bronx cheer. One chap so despised modifying adjectives that he unmodified himself. Have you yet to consider that without thoughts there are no circumstances, only silent physical conditions, which interest no alert man, since there's nothing to be done about them? I had lived that. It wasn't. The ordinary love foolish tales about errant knights helps keep them away from mental mirrors. The jelly on the simple's plate. Men love fiction because facts won't shake like that. Some of you may know there's little tunes lingering behind that one. And by the way, the history of these strange little creatures. The very first simple person, Adam or Eve or whoever, became simple by asking life, right after they became conscious enough to speak, hey, what's with all this? Then waiting for a reply. One guy's personal take on a certain subject. I don't like for people to ask me personal questions for 2 reasons. One is that they're a waste of time, and 2, I'm afraid I might answer them. The plain reason that ordinary people sound foolish when they try to be serious is that they haven't a clue as to what really is serious. Time-specific rituals were initially for the purpose of bringing one's attention to, this is one term, the opening 2 words. Time-specific rituals were initially for the purpose of bringing one's attention to. But the slippery ability of the mind soon had clock watching replacing the original intention. Those who underrate and miscalculate the powers of the mind sure don't have theirs on theirs. The idea of demons, devils, and dragons give comfort to man in that they help turn his thoughts outward where no harm is done, rather than on themselves wherein lurks dangers never imagined. The unseen simplicity of it all. Many questions, one answer. Many problems, one solution. Many complaints, one cure. All much too simple to be routinely seen. And now from our City Lit Dictionary. Poetry. Whine put to rhyme. So we have poetry lovers in the audience. As they frolicked, one kid sang, you can live in the body, you can live in the mind, but you can't live in the middle of the railroad tracks. And his buddy rejoined, sure you can. What are you thinking of? And the first kid thought, probably too much. There is a certain kind of magic that can only be done by not doing it. The king announced that the next person who said something so enigmatic that he, His Royal Grace, could not understand it would be executed. And a sizable number of knights immediately volunteered. The prince said, Papa, I don't get it. And the king said, that's my boy. The life man lives, unique to him, can be driven either by daze and distraction or conscious awareness. The way to tell if someone's spiritual or psychological activity is just a hobby or an actual personal quest is whether they want to talk about it or not. Certain men have long used the attention to breath as a method to control their thoughts, since they are equally mechanical. If you want some idea of just how many people are actively engaged in the attempt to expand their consciousness, count how often you are. One man would dream dreams, and sometimes dream dreams which were not dreams, which would stop the dreams. Much has been made of this by the ordinary, and most of it useless. All of man's history that he feels important is life's way of offering up potentially useful myths. Consciousness unattended is a terrible thing to waste if you're one of the few. Then it's even worse than terrible. Figure it. People will accept cracked criticism in preference to a perfect mirror. Dig it. Only thoughts criticize, and only people with thoughts can be criticized. Those without can't hear them. The introduction of writing, then the subsequent printing of train schedules, and the attendant discussions thereof, is life's way of forgiving man for not trying to get aboard. One man had an uncontrollable beast living inside him. A priest said it was sin, an astrologer said it was fate, and a psychiatrist said it was his unconscious. But the man began to suspect it was much simpler than that. On one world, time doesn't exist until you stop thought. Just the opposite of ours. There is but one civilizing influence, and that is expanded consciousness. Concern for the downtrodden is misplaced until you can recognize the sole of life's shoe. As regards city intellectual hunts, no kill is sufficient unless it is overkill. As regards fashion, the pith helmet was modeled after, or at least named for, the mystic's mental mode. If you're lost in thought, even too much is never enough. One man forgot where he left his hat. One man forgot where he left his keys. One man forgot where he left his mind, and thus forgot where he left his life. On one planet, they harbor a legend that claims consciousness grows at the expense of the tongue. A gnat can stop a train if it remembers to cry, "Stop!" A man asked if the statesman enlightenment and awakening would not be the result of prolonged states of expanded consciousness. No, the result of prolonged attempts to expand consciousness. The simple will object to it the most. What? This, all of this. If telling idiots they're idiots would help anyone, even the awakened would do it. Here's a tip. Usually when you're talking, you're not conscious. How can I get mad? I wrote the son of a bitch. Every time he saw a whale swallow a minnow, one man was reminded of something. In the world of the few, when it's time for a change, only a change will do. One man found a one-sided coin and promptly disappeared. What a bunch of news. God, this must have been a long day today. Well, let's delve back in one of our favorite subjects of bloated biblical history. No, it's not. It was a follow-up to one of the first news items on this particular page. It was a history of simple people. If you remember, it was the jelly on simple people's plate. Why men love fiction, because facts don't shake like that. Check with your grandmother or your mother, probably your grandmother, about certain Dixieland and Gulf area blues songs from the turn of the century. But that's another story. But after that news item was a history of these strange creatures, simple people. The very first simple person. So we're getting down to the very first. And I did not try and identify it for you. I just used those kinds of mythical, allegorical examples of Adam and Eve, or whomever you like, or whoever if you speak good English. The very first simple person, Adam and Eve or somebody, became simple by asking life, right after they got conscious enough to be able to speak, they just almost immediately turned to life and went, "Hey, what's with all this?" Then waiting for a reply. See, the news item was, this kind of history is so secret, been so well hidden from the public, that I started to leave tonight just the first part of it. That is, that the very first simple people became simple by, immediately after becoming conscious enough to speak, turning to life and saying, "Hey, what's with this?" And so I was going to let that go and let you digest that for a couple of years. But sometimes time puts on weight. So I gave you the whole thing. The first part is enough to chew on if you're not satisfied with being a simple person. If you're a simple person, we're wasting our time anyway. But the very first simple person, now here's the full version, became simple by asking life, just as soon as they became conscious enough to speak, they asked life, "Hey, what's with all this?" Then waiting for a reply. To give you another description of that kind of history, not of just simple people, but first of all people. To become simple, first you've got to become conscious. And before men became conscious, if we're going to play this kind of verbal evolutionary game, imagine man before the nervous system was ignited up to the level of consciousness and we could reflect and speak. If you consider that man was just another creature on this planet, just a part of the physical food chain, then right past that point, you could look at it this way, that the very first reason, the most minimal reason that life had to produce some creature that was more than a physical, or more than a link in simply a physical food chain to start a new level, that the first thing to do would be to make the physical survival easier. Would you care to make that sentence easier? Okay. You could look at it this way. Life turning out man and deciding to make him conscious, making this real simple. The first, he's a physical creature, and assume he wanders around like in a cartoon, caveman, no intellect, just barely at the same level as the other primates, just struggling for survival. And then life decides to pick us out and said, well, let's fire up his nervous system higher. Then as soon as man became conscious, the first use to which life would have put man's consciousness would be to make physical survival more efficient so that he would then have time to devote to his new aspect, his new characteristic. And so the first thing that the intellect would have to do, the first thing it does with everyone, you can look at any, where you'd care to look at history, the whole development of civilization, etc. Take it allegorically or take it literally, is the mind looking after itself physically, looking after you physically. It's what you do now. As little time as you may have to devote to work at the office, it is still you working on the survival level. Instead of being out and hunting and fishing, etc., you're there punching a machine or running a word processor of some kind. And those hours that you devote, like the original history, the first history of man, you're having to do that. Let's assume that you don't have any particular interest in your job personally. You do it for the money. That is the same kind of history as stepping right out of a caveman cartoon. It is the initial history of man using the intellect to the point to make life easier, because you would find it easier no matter how you complain about your job. The average person would find it more to their liking, no matter how they bitch about working for this sorry-ass boss and this sorry-ass company and this sorry-ass salary and this sorry-ass working conditions. And you go, well, look, why don't you just quit and go up, like maybe mine up in, mine for gold up in Alaska, get a job as a lumberjack, or, come out with us and do roofing. And most people are going to go, well, no. Why don't you become a farmer? Then you'll have to put up all these sorry-ass people and your boss. You're out there by yourself, and it's do or die. You on your own. And their eyes will light up. Is anything shorter than momentarily? Okay, we'll go momentarily. They go, oh, that's a great idea. And they go, no, I'm not going to do that. So in a sense, you are, if you're not out actually just about farming, is about what it would amount to. If you weren't a farmer or a hunter, then anything you're doing is an instant individual replay of that initial history of man's use of the intellect to make physical survival easier, more efficient. And it is more efficient, believe it or not, well, you can figure this out, to work in that sorry-ass job 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That is more efficient. As irritating as it is, than it would be if we threw you out in the wilds of Canada somewhere and gave you 10 acres and a sharp, gave you a Bowie knife and said, and a pack of seeds or something, and said, go for it. Some way you would find your way out of the wilds of Canada, back to Patterson, New Jersey, knocking on the door of that old sorry-ass plant asking for your job back. It would take you more than 8 hours a day to keep yourself out operating at that kind of survival level. This has got to be obvious. It would take much more than 8 hours a day. And it certainly would take more than 5 days a week. And there are no 2-week vacations. There are no breaks. It's where the term hand-to-mouth came from. You have to eat while you got it, because 2 days from now you may be having to eat your hand. That might be all there is. All right, what I want you to do is understand that the mind is still, in large part, to some part, is devoted to, let's say 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, is devoted to the survival, the more efficient survival of you physically. That again, that's why I said that if you had no interest in the job and I went through all those kind of insults to your job, that is intellectually is the only place that man really shines, even in potential, as an individual. Other than that, we're all a bunch of hippos, a bunch of chimps, if we didn't have an intellect, or as sophisticated people like to call it, their personality. Dazzling very often too. But what I want you to understand, that the intellect, there you are 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, you are at a place that you would not choose to be. Your intellect finds no joy therein, receives no nourishment to speak of. If we ask you intellectually, we ask you personally, if you did not have to work for a living, would you work here? The answer is no, under no conditions. Do you get any satisfaction here other than the money? No. All right, but understand, just an average person now is still saddled with this kind of continuing history and evolution, this slow evolution of man from just a physical creature into now being more and more an intellectually driven, a collective life that is intellectually driven more and more by the intellect. That's just obvious. That's no great thing to have to observe. But what people do not consider is the ratio of what the mind is doing still compared to the body. It is now, think about all the complaints. There's nothing brand new, but think of the kinds of complaints that most people have about their vocation, about their work. And they don't notice it. They just say, well, I don't like working. I don't like to do this. It is not that the body does not like work, because if you're genetically sound, if you're an average person, your body has got no complaint against work. Why else do people now who work in offices and the job they hate hurry home and put on their running shoes and go out and run? Or rush through traffic to get to the gym and spend 2 hours working out? The body would not mind working. The body would not mind being out and having to farm for a living. The body does not mind work. It does not mind the exertion of energy. It does not mind looking after itself. But now man is more than his mind, and that's part of the intellect's job is to make the body's job easier. Not for the body's sake, but just to make it easier so that now the person has more time to devote to this. That's why they complain about work, because work is not made. Ordinary work is not made unless it is something that you are personally interested in, such as if you truly are wired up to be a musician and you can make a living doing it. Then that's another story. It's still not as great as you always thought, because you still got those ratty-ass people to put up with. I know. But at any rate, with most people, their work is minimal to no intellectual, offers minimal to no intellectual satisfaction. That is the basis of all complaints. The specifics of their complaints that they wish they had another job, or they wish they was working for another brokerage house other than this one. It's not true. They say that. Or I wish that I had gone into drywalling instead of plumbing. I shouldn't use that, because that's almost... You wish you'd went to work for IBM instead of Intel. That kind of thing. That would not make any difference, because if you're not getting intellectual satisfaction, which is quite scant in most people's lives, at least in the workplace, then all you're doing is making that you're spending 40 hours a week. They don't look at it this way, and that's why I want you to look at it this way, to see it from a certain view. You're spending 40 hours a week doing something that you hate, that you get no satisfaction of up here, so that you've got the rest of how many hours, 180, that you've got well over 100 more hours to devote to here. Available, that is. I'm not sure we need to go into how most people then spend this time to nourish, to water, to plow, to pamper, to enrich their intellectual lives. No, I don't think we'll go into that at all, because there's some people sitting at home right now, 50 pounds overweight with a box of chocolates and a beer, watching TV, and accidentally watching this. But now they just change channel. But do consider and understand that the way things are arranged is that man now, that the first job is intellect. Just the way it is now. The first thing you have to do every week, if you're just an ordinary person, you may more than anything want to be at the beach. You may more than anything want to be out singing with a band somewhere. You may more than anything want to be out playing tennis. But to do all of those things, to do everything that you're interested in, you know what you have to do first. You've got to go to that goddamn job and get those 40 hours out of the way. You have to do that to pay the rent, to feed yourself. It is a given. That is the initial history of conscious man. And it's still going on. That's why I want you to see. You're still at that kind of cusp of the evolution of it, going from man just being a physical creature, wherein if you were just a physical creature, I can say it'd take 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep you alive. And that's not necessarily true, because there's some animals that don't have to do that much. But if you know your National Geographic TV shows, you've been alert, not sitting there all soggy brain from that cheap beer, then you know that many animals do not spend 100 hours. Lions, they do not spend 100 hours a week working, that is hunting for food, except there's kind of a trick. They sleep 120 hours a week. And then the 20 or 30 left over, half of them they're smelling around and batting each other, and then a few of them is spent eating. But the point is, everything else being equal, we don't know what man would have been. That's not the point. But you understand it could be true, quite possibly true. And I stand here, I could come up with a better figure, or come up with a figure based upon the ratio, if we take their belief of how much time it takes for a lion that they have to spend every day just gathering food, hunting for food. Not always successful, but they have to spend hours a night, hours, unless they're fortunate. Then if you look at man, he is not as strong as a lion, he's not as fast as a lion. Look how puny man is physically. So compared to that, if we're going to say that it takes a lion an average of 5 hours a night of screwing around looking for food to stay alive, then I think it would be safe to say that man would screw around a good 12 hours a day. If you had your Bowie knife and 10 acres in the wilds of Canada. Just think about it. or if you're out looking for food every day, it would probably very easily take you 10 or 12 hours a day out by yourself to stay alive, especially once you had a family, other mouths. It would surely take that. So, the point back being that you have now been part of that evolution to the point that you can now, as much as you hate it up here, you can go out and slave 8 hours behind the hot counter at a 7-Eleven store and then walk the hell away from it and get a check. And then you've got all that time left to do something else. My little short history of how the first simple man came about. And you do understand I was implying in this, as always, that almost everybody on this planet, for one reason or from one view, are simple. Not just by my definition of some kind, but they're simple on the basis that they cannot find solutions to questions that are not even questions. They cannot find cures to things that have no cures, that have no problem, and they cannot see that. It has to do with the binary nature of the mind, the way it operates. And if you're being run by ordinary automatic thoughts, you'll never understand the position in which man is. That is the basis of me calling people simple. And I'm including everybody. You know, people who apparently run the world, the great economic thinkers, the bankers, the presidents, etc., they're simple. And so, other than anyone involved with an active individual effort to make themselves, to expand their own consciousness, everyone's simple, including those who are making some active effort to expand their consciousness. At the moments that they're not, they be simple. They be just as simple as the president. Thank you. I know it's frightening. I didn't mean to be insulting, but you're going to find out for yourself. At any time you're not making effort, you're as simple as all the world's great thinkers and world leaders. I know it's frightening, and it should be. That's why I said it. Trying to make you snap out of it. I mean, since we can't use guilt, I was trying to use fear. My God, I've sunk to the level of consciousness of a world leader, of a king, of a priest, of a pope, a rabbi. So, at the ordinary level of so-called consciousness, everyone is simple. They only see two-dimensionally. So, what I was giving you was a history. I call it the history of simple man. But we're talking about a history of man as he is, ordinarily, simple of mind. Now think back to my history. That the first simple people became simple by one act. As soon as they became conscious, before that they weren't simple people, they weren't even people. But as soon as the intellect fired up enough that they could speak, what was the first thing, according to my history? What is the first thing they did? Well, I didn't throw in the theatrics. Here it is. First thing they did. Now, see, up until then, if humans had been here, they didn't look around any more than a lion did. They only looked at that which was pertinent. They only looked around at movement when they were hungry. Other than that, they didn't give a damn if a chipmunk ran by them. Plus, it's not even an hors d'oeuvre for a lion. Lions just stare like everything else. They just stare until there's some reason to look around. And they only look around when it is based upon survival, physical survival. So until then, men were no different than everyone else, let's say, in this kind of history. Then the day came. The intellect gets fired up, and men are now at a so-called level above the animals, that they are conscious at the normal state of consciousness. And so, here it is what I was implying. They're conscious, and they're in the same environment where they've always been, but now it looks different because they're no longer seeing with simply survival eyes, they're now seeing with the mind. And so, and then they go, and probably with gestures. This is probably the first gesture. That I'm not positive, I'm guessing. So they looked around. All the things that right in the midst of everywhere they'd always been, they looked around. And of course, what really got them, after the initial surprise of looking around and around, had never even been there before, you got to understand. Which is one tonight to make it more complicated, I pointed out, I said, have you ever considered that without thoughts there are no circumstances, only conditions? See, up until then, there's just conditions. Lions any creature with no intellect only knows conditions. And of course, they don't have that word, but all they know is conditions. I'm hungry, they jump for food. I don't like the rain anymore, they look for a tree. It takes thoughts to know circumstances. So until man had an intellect, there was no out there. There were no circumstances, but here it is, the same conditions, the same circumstances, you understand? The same environment, same physical environment, but they never looked at it with a mind because they never had a mind until right now. So they look around. And the first thing out of their mouth they say to life is, what's with all this? Now I made that, you laugh several times. What is all this? And it can sound like some sort of joke, or you might conclude it had some sort of sarcasm behind it, that I was indeed picking on men and calling them simple-minded, and that was the best question they could come up with. That was a great question. I'm not making fun of the question. What would be the first question? Because when I say what gives all this, now let's get closer to it. It's not what gives all this, because all that had already been there. But see, here we go. The intellect fires up, and they're looking at the same environment, the same physical circumstances and conditions before they knew the difference. See, this will kind of throw you off. What's with all this? Now, they may have said that in that sense, but that's not what they were asking. What they were asking is, what's with all this? I could also give you a kind of other history. We'll consider this a metaphorical history, because I'm not going to tell you this is literally true. But that this is the beginning of men hearing voices, believing in external forces of a supernatural nature, of a supernatural mortal nature, that is guides, demons, spirits, and etc. Is what the hell is this? Because they look around at first, here they are in the same place, the same savanna, the same plains, the same woods where they've been living all these years, and they look around, and now they've got a mind, and they're seeing through the mind. Life has ceased to be simply life, silent life, it's become reality. Conditions have become circumstances. This, before they had any word, they just look around and they know they're in the same place, but they know that they've never seen it like this. And so the thing that when we sing, they turn to life and say, what's with all this? It's not really what's with all this, although they may have put it that way before they realize, wait a minute, nothing out here has changed. Something in me's changed. The question was valid. I could point out to you that rather than just making it sound as though it was some sort of joke or sarcastic shot I took to say that was the first thing they'd think of to say, that was the cornerstone of civilization. That's the building, that's the original foundation of all science, all inquiry. It's what's with all this. Because if you have no intellect, a lion never thinks what's with all this. Even without an intellect, you ought to be sharp enough. How about this? If with non-thinking, a lion, no creature ever sits around with any sense of ambivalence, uncertainty, which would be a silent, physical manifestation of the question, what's with all this? A lion's sitting there and a motorcycle goes by. The lion won't even pay attention. They'll probably just stare right through it because it has no interest in it. A lion, even non-thinking, doesn't have a feeling like, what's with all this? A lion doesn't give a damn. I can't eat it. I can't screw it. It's not going to kill me. I guess lions learned pretty quick that nothing was going to really fool with them except those big guys with the trunks. You mean red caps? No, elephants. Well, that guy's been hanging around the Kennedy Airport too much. Well, the thing is, I told you when you go up there, just because a guy grabs your bags and says you need some help, you don't have to tip him. No, you don't really. You can just sustain some knife wounds. That was both way off the subject and not at all according to how you look at it. I want you to understand that there is inquiry in life, but it's only in man. That's one of the things, by the way, that intrigues, in fact, acts in a captious manner with psychologists and zoologists, but especially psychologists, is trying to read into some of the higher primates and pointing out that they're the only creature that shows any curiosity. And it makes an interesting little sidebar in a National Geographic TV special, because it does. I'm sure that some of them would say, well, that's the only thing that distinguishes man, or that is the most distinguishing mark of man, is his intellectual curiosity. And this particular chimpanzee, or this particular family of chimpanzees, look, we show them something new. We show them a TV. We've got these chimpanzees. They are so evolved. I like this one. That we put in, when we first brought them in from Africa, or wherever they got them, we put in TV sets there in front of their cages, and they didn't pay any attention. But after working with them now for 10 years, we've gone through several generations, they've evolved so much that they will now sit there and watch TV. And they announce such things like that on National Geographic, the voiceover, like, boy, we're making some kind of progress now, aren't we? I guess it's according to how much of an animal lover you are, how much effort you'd go to find out who it was doing this, so chimpanzees, and do something equally nice for them. What I want you to understand is physically, you have almost no curiosity. That's why I drew up the thing about a lion laying there and a motorcycle go by. Unless he was starving to death and there was a gazelle riding the motorcycle, or the noise was so loud. But let's say a man on a bicycle, and you would think, and we know for a fact this lion has never seen a bicycle. A lion will stare right through the son of a bitch because it has no vested interest in it. It is not even one of its conditions. It's just the landscape. It's no more than a weed. It's no more than a bush over here. A bush that elephants might find to be quite tasty, but lions seem to have no propensity toward vegetarianism. And so the bush is something. It's just something in the way, something to lay on, something to push out of the way. It's just there. They have no curiosity. A lion does not go around. When I say a lion, you understand now I'm speaking about any physical entity on this planet without an intellect. From here down in man, there's no physical curiosity. It all starts here. And so that was the first, as silly as it sounded, that I said that as soon as man became conscious, the way they got to be simple. So I said they became simple. I'll give you the follow-up in a minute. The way they got to be simple was by that first question. You understand, this whole thing was sort of a trick, because now I'm disassembling it, because at first it did sound like some sort of shot to man. That here's how man got simple. And then if you heard it the first time too, you'd think, well, all you're saying is men got simple because as soon as they became conscious, the first thing they did was ask a stupid, simple question. A dumb question. No wonder that now. No. The question, since life made them do it, the life was apropos as can be. Because it was the first expression of curiosity. It was the first expression of the intellect. But man would look out, and I assure you that the first one would have been, he'd go, what is this? What's happened? What's with all this? Because he realizes, I am now looking at things, and let's assume that he has enough silent visual memory implanted in his neurons that he looks around and he sees things that he knows his eye, now that he has an intellect, things that have been visually imprinted already. He looks around at things that never interested him. He turns around and he sees a bicycle. And the bicycle's been laying there, propped up against a tree for the last 1,000 years. But man then had no need for a bicycle or a television set. Or how about this? An animal, a skunk. Or some bush that would be toxic to man. Something that physically he had never had any vested interest in. You understand? It could have been right there. There's this bush, this huge tree. Let's say it has some sort of poisonous bark. Is right there next to the cave where he's been living all of his life. But then the day that the intellect fires up, and he looks around, however long it takes, and gives it this thing about, because he looks around, and he knows that thing's been there, but he never really looked at it. You understand, to be the same as a lion given an intellect, and a second bicycle comes by. The lion would have gone, what in the hell was that? But the first time, without an intellect, since he can't eat it, since it has nothing to do with the physical food chain of which the lion is a part, it just goes through and he stares. It might as well be a leaf blowing by. It has nothing to do with his physical survival. Man looked around as soon as the intellect was fired up. And his first, after he took it in, after he realized, you understand the point I'm trying to make, that he just, take it the way I'm presenting it. It's a fair description. It's not untoward. That he realizes there are physical things here. That I know that thing's been there, but see, he never had an interest in it, so he looks around at this tree. And it's not, remember, it's not just a matter of the tree, it's the matter, now suddenly, it's as though, now I'm going to put the words on it for us, it's as though he looks around and thinks, where the hell have I been? But he knows he's been right here. He's been walking in and out that cave a dozen times a day for 40 years, let's just say. And suddenly the intellect fires up, and he looks around at his same physical environment. And he has the understanding, he has the recollection that none of this is different. That thing, now that, you know, I'm saying the tree. He didn't have a name. He said he knows that thing's always been there, but he didn't notice it any more than the wind, than the clouds. It was just stuff. He had no interest. So now he sees something right there next to me, something I've passed. Thousands of times I have already, and I was in a sense never aware of it. Now I'm aware of it. What in the hell is going on here? I could also suggest that being the beginning of all civilization, that being the beginning of man's, I was going to say, heroic Herculean climb to the highest, or to the heights of consciousness. Or I could be more truthful and point out that that was the beginning of man stumbling around and trying to become more conscious. And for the sake of those of you with genteel feelings, I will not tell you, if I happen to know, how far man has come since that time. We will leave it at this. If it makes you feel better, we got lots better technology than they had then. Let's leave it at that, all right? At the same time that the first man, the first person became a simple person by asking what's going on here. Now remember I know I'm around out of time because I planned it that way. Remember the second part was man became simple. The first person became a simple person by, as soon as he could talk, became conscious enough to look around and went, what in the world, what is all this? Dash! He asked loud, what's going on here? Then waiting, has been waiting for an answer. See, it's the second part that is sort of the bunghole in the barrel in the back room of the saloon in the gold rush days in Alaska, which is it's too obscure. It is the hair in the sardines. Or according to your taste in food, I guess the sardine and the hairs. We have the first man. See, the simplicity is the man's intellect said, what's going on here? And he let it go at that. Now, humans will say they did not. If someone had followed this, if some ordinary sane person had followed all this, and I said that, they would say, no, that's not true. Because if we take your little metaphor of how man got started, and as soon as the intellect got going, that man looked around. I'm playing an ordinary person now hearing this. They go say, I can go for all that. That very soon, the first thing they would have gone was, God, what is it? What is it? What is it? And they would say, there it is. There's the spark of human curiosity, the beginning of ingenuity, the beginning of technology, the beginning of all the inventions, the beginning of all human progress, whatever degree we've enjoyed thus far. They could say that. And they could say, well, you make a mistake to imply that there was something amiss there, because that has grown, that has blossomed his curiosity. The more we know, the more we want to know. We won't go into that. But here is the trick part from the view of someone attempting to do something outside the areas of automatic mechanical technology. is man said, what is all of this? And then waited for an answer. Now I know that this intellectual curiosity has flourished and has proved profitable, as witnessed again by the fact that we have TV cameras, indoor lighting, and etc. But now consider this. If we bypass the parts, and all that has more directly to do still with man's physical survival than anything else. But if we take just the first part of man saying what's going on here, and then the second part of it that I said, dash, then waiting for an answer, that was like the first spark of human consciousness. That was the beginning of all human conscious potential. But if you wait for an answer, that's also the end of it. So life, being the efficient swashbuckler that it is, it had men in general suddenly take the first big ha! Aha! And of course the aha was just that the intellect was fired up, and them going, ah, what a place, what a place. What's going on here? And remember, ordinary people would say, well, hey, it didn't stop there because man keeps investigating. We have a large part of the national budget is devoted to nothing but R&D, pure science, research. We're still doing it. I know. But an ordinary person would miss it anyway. If you say, as all men did, as somebody as Adam or Eve did for you, they went, what is all this? And then they waited for an answer. For someone attempting to do this sort of thing, the idea, even the reality, let us say, the truth that man has progressed technically, scientifically. So an ordinary person would say, man hadn't waited for an answer from somewhere. Man went out there and, by God, ripped these laws of science and physics right out of the grasp of ignorance. The grasp of ignorance. The eggs of graspment. Forget that. Back to what would be feeding the intellect. There it is. Life had men stand up, or had somebody in your stead, standing in for you, Adam or Eve, stood there after they became conscious enough to realize, I am now in a whole new world. This is a whole new game. This is a whole new life. I'm in the same place physically, but nothing is the same. I have been born a second time automatically. Of course, it was the first time as far as he knew, because before then he didn't know he'd been born. But Adam and Eve, on your behalf, looked around, and after a period of time went, what is this? In other words, what is this? What is the secret? What is this about? What is life? Then, if you're simple, you wait for an answer. Now never mind that man went out and discovered the phonograph, and then discovered diamonds so that they could play vinyl records before we had CD. Discovered electricity, invented rayon. Forget all that. So you can look at that. That is still based upon making physical survival more efficient. What was going on here? What was feeding this? Well, I've already implied to you. You look around, almost nothing. But this kept man busy. And so simultaneously life had man's intellect fired up, and I could narrow down, since it's my metaphor, since it's my myth, that Adam and Eve stood there and went, what is this? And almost instantaneously had the kind of sensation that, God, trying to figure it out is going to be a lot more trouble than it's worth. But at first, just think for a few seconds. Think what a great movie. Especially with animated, where you can make all these. He's standing up on this high cliff overlooking the world. What's supposed to represent the world? And his intellect fires up. All these nice bright colors that Disney's good at, kind of flashing, and birds begin. And his eyes, you can see a spark behind his eyes. What is this? Very shortly, though, he understands, I'm asking, what is this to be alive, to be here? And the sensation overcame like, God damn, trying to figure this out is going to be a nut breaker. This. And he went, just very shortly he understood this is going to be more, so he turns around to Eve, let's say, that Adam did, they'd have him do it, and he turns around to Eve and goes, maybe we should take up sewing. Maybe we could stitch some of those skins together and make a whole suit, or maybe an evening gown. You understand? It was at first, there it was, they had the chance, life made them go, what is this? What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of being a human? Which what they're asking is, what is the meaning of this? Because until they had that, there was no such question. There was no question. But now the question is, people say, well, what is the secret of life? What is the meaning of life? That's not what they're asking. I know they think they are. They're asking, what's the meaning of this? But they don't hear that. Especially with a gesture, because then it seems, there's no avoiding it once you add a gesture. So here he is, he goes, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of me being conscious? And the music swells up and the fellers, but then if it's my cartoon, I grab it from Disney and all those middle-class people, and in his eyes you see this look like, uh-oh. He realizes, I ain't going to get in all this shit. And that's when he look around and go, honey, why don't we try stitching some of those skins together? Maybe we could open up a little boutique or something, or stay warmer. And he wanders off, see? That was it. Just enough to get the intellect going, and it's still just alive enough that men swear that they're engaged in pure science and research and etc. But after they said, what is this? And they waited for an answer, which is where religion came from, where all the so-called occult sciences and all, everything from astrologers and psyches, and you're waiting for an answer. Somebody tell me what's going on. So simultaneously man became conscious, and almost simultaneously, from a more expanded view, stepped on it. Of course, if you recognize the bottom of a certain person's shoe, it's kind of misdirected to say he stepped on it, but it was fired up, and almost at the same time given a good dousing with a bucket of water. And he went, oh, well, okay. Let's work on electricity. How about that? And off they wandered. If you wait for an answer, you're simple. You're ordinary, though. The whole world's waiting for an answer. Presidents, prime ministers, the leaders of all religions, everyone's waiting for the answer. It is a real cheap hobby.